So today I'm very great honored to be invited to Gilbert from United Kingdom. He has a great experience in privacy, also the new technology field. That's very amazed to have a call with him. So Gilbert, thank you for coming this time.
Thanks so much for having me. It's really good to talk with you.
Awesome. So let me start with his profile. Gilbert is a privacy technologist and entrepreneur. Gilbert is co-founder of Finfuro, a fintech startup based in the UK and in Paris, but spent most of his career in the marketing industry. He began in financial services, then founded the digital agency, building out-driven tech solutions for clients like Microsoft and Volkswagen. He later developed this into one of the first software companies for website owners to audit and inform users about the cookies, which was bought by OneTrust. Since then, he's been CEO of Tap My Data, a startup using a blockchain to help people exercise their GDPR rights, chairs the Responsible Marketing Committee at the UK's DMA, and is a tutor on data privacy at their IDM college. So great to have you call Gilbert this time again. So yeah, let me start the interview agenda. You have a great experiences so far. Then I'm happy to be exploring with you together. So how did you work at the marketing and data privacy field? Besides, how did you come to this field?
Yeah, I mean, when you describe it like that, it's quite a sort of a sort of roundabout journey to get where we are today. And that's partly because, probably because I'm super old, but also because I think it's safe to say that I've got into a lot of things, in particular privacy, by mistake, to be quite honest. And I'm personally glad that I didn't take a conventional route, if that exists, via a law or academia. I mean, in terms of my background, I actually studied archaeology and anthropology. And I was just listening to the radio this morning where someone an archaeologist talking about a big find, and it still excites me. And I think it was, a love of the former of that, which I picked up on digs. But as I studied it, I quickly became fascinated by how relevant these patterns of current or recent human behavior, that could be like, coins or bits of pots, are when studying the leavings of the past. And it's something I think about more and more. So I mean, in terms of my background, I didn't want to stay in academia or work as a practical archaeologist. So I took up a job on Citigroup's graduate trainee program. And I have to say that was a really great insight into how a large organization used data, more or less well over big distances and with thousands of human moving parts, and also in a regulated industry. And it was a time of the original dot-com boom. And I found myself working on projects to build the bank's first digital marketing channels. So things around web and email marketing, which, now are, the kind of the building blocks of the data trade that we have today. And, when that boom went bust, as you mentioned, I took the opportunity to start a web agency with a friend from college. And, that was exciting. It was two of us, and we quickly grew the business and found ourselves doing more and more with data and getting sort of sucked into the world of behavioral advertising and marketing. So from archaeology at uni, I now found myself and my team working with cookies and other potentially invasive technologies. And I didn't, I have to admit, I didn't grasp the significance of this at first. So to me and my team, web cookies were just tools. So they were things that we used to make the web work in terms of personalization, shopping trolleys that we all see from e-commerce. Obviously, what we've also seen with tech is how these tools took on a dual function to basically create and track profiles of you and me and everyone else as part of this $1 trillion business of behavioral advertising. And like I say, this, we carried on with this on behalf of clients as part of this huge ecosystem that was always growing. And I think the first crack in that appeared with the introduction of the EU cookie laws or the e-privacy directive, which it's slightly scary to think is now, it's already around 10 years ago that they were, enshrined as directives. Now, these laws, I think, greatly, which were accelerated by GDPR, sort of created an explosion in terms of a new tech industry and also an opportunity in providing lots of work for lawyers and consultants, experts like yourself, and for companies to deal with a risk that many didn't know that they had. Because I think we've all got used to seeing data as an asset, and we created huge, lakes of the stuff. And I think GDPR for the first time showed us that these were without, due care and attention, these could turn toxic and become a risk. Now, for us, this was an opportunity. We were able to pivot our agency into creating a software product to help companies automate and manage their risk using cookie banners. And there was no rule book for that. We really had to create our own categories for the invasiveness of cookies in terms of which was strictly necessary. And, this has now become part of the street furniture of the web. Cookie banners are everywhere. So yes, you can partly blame me for that. And as you mentioned, I sold this business to OneTrust back in 2017. And it's a strange feeling, when I'm looking at going on to say like a classic rock website or something like that, I see our tech still in use with around 60% of the Fortune 500 companies' websites. And it's, the UX, that's kind of nice to know that the DNA of what we created is still there on the web, but also it shows how we're only at the beginning of this process. Our agency as individuals in terms of consent and how the choices we make around our data can't start and end with a cookie banner. So, this process is all about these companies starting to get, to move beyond that and bake a baseline of privacy by design into their core business processes and tech, not just the web UX, but also reacquaint people with their data and rights as citizens. And that's something that's only just beginning, and that's what really interests me.
Yeah, absolutely. I was very inspired that you had experienced in this industry in early days and come to the privacy first this time. That's been opportunities, not only for the marketing part, but also the business development. Probably I had talked to many of the industry guys at this time, then they try to transform it into a business model, but actually it's not easy to comply with the unexpected risk, right? That's the big problem right now. And my next question is about your previous company is Tap My Data. I was very excited that they talking with you about the blockchain project, which is the futures, the infrastructures for all the database, I assume that. So how did you work at the Tap My Data in the previous business?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, as an individual, it's very hard in practice to exercise your rights and actually particularly to get your data compared to how easy it is to lose it in the first place. We're all guilty. We all click on banners to make them go away. And that's a limit of how we're exercising our control. And at that point, we largely lose control of what happens to that data. And I wanted to, do something which continued to have that consumer focus. That's when I was approached by a startup in Bristol called Tap My Data. I was really interested because they built, again, something that was lacking, a piece of consumer grade tech, like a really nice, friendly tech in the form of a mobile app for people to start to exercise their rights. And we got talking back and forth until they, it's the first job that I got via Twitter. We got talking back and forth. They were doing a white paper. I contributed to that, and we ended up with me leading the project for 2 years. And I think what, the focus was that a lot of this wasn't new. Things like personal data vaults, keeping your info on a phone, things like VPNs and clouds of me had been around for some time, but I think they'd failed to capture the public's imagination. Lots of them were quite academic, quite complex. So what I liked about Tap My Data is that they focused on one single task, which was asking companies for our data and holding it securely on our phone when we get it back. And in doing this, we quickly found that people did care about their data. Consumers, people on the street, loved the tech, and they were curious about where their details had got to. So you mentioned, the problem with privacy is that you're only as strong as the weakest link in the chain. So most of the time, the way that we know about how much information a company has on us is when there's a breach. And we found that with Tap My Data that the average person had 130 records held on them by different companies, more or less securely. And every user as well, we did interviews of them, had different reasons for using the app. And actually a lot of them were really affecting. Many had been born under regimes where data was used as a tool of surveillance and repression. And that was their reason for using it. They wanted to know. Obviously, companies on the other side who were holding the data were understandably less enthusiastic. So they didn't want to let go of control of the data that they in many cases had paid for. In some cases, they viewed as their property. And as you mentioned, they had responsibilities for its safeguarding, which are very valid. And I should stress that this kind of data arms race, that we were all part of this. So as a technologist, the default approach I had to building websites and apps for a decade had been to get all the data we could, do our best to hold it securely, and work out what to do with it later. And I think what we're seeing now is the logical conclusion of this. There's huge amounts of data and online attention concentrated in the hands of a few platforms. We know who they are. And then there's a large sea of slightly sketchy data, which is increasingly a liability, a risk which is held by everyone else. And we started to make progress when we were able to show that the less info a company held, the less risk it represented. And actually, the more that they could put questions from a privacy-aware public away from legal to customer teams, the better the level of trust was. Because actually, what we found is that people don't want to have all their data deleted and live in a cave, but they do want to have control. And now increasingly, we'll come to in a bit later, to ask for a slice of the commercial action of these, these $1 trillion a year. And you mentioned, blockchain. That's where blockchain comes in. Now, personally, I failed to see the relevance, to be quite honest, of much blockchain technology around the first time it was hyped a few years back. So, most of the applications, like things like complex supply chain lines, sourcing provenance of things like diamonds and Stradivarius violins and priceless antiques, like, sadly, they don't play a role in my life. But when I met the tech guys from Tap My Data, I kind of light bulb moment, because one of the big problems currently with data privacy, I think, is that the businesses which hold our data essentially mark their own homework. So they hold the record for how data is held and whether rights are respected when someone asks about their data. And regulators who police this, their only window, or rather a rear view mirror, it's the number of public complaints when something goes wrong in terms of a data breach, or becoming aware of a huge privacy scandal like Cambridge Analytica. So the blockchain in this context can be used as an inviolable public statement of record. So if you use an analogy from anthropology, it's like a tally stick of transactions. So when I ask a company for my data, a notch in the stick is made, and when they respond, equally so. Now, given the requirements in GDPR for responding promptly to things like some DSARs to subject access requests, this creates an audit trail which can be interrogated by regulators, by civil rights groups, and other interested third parties. And the other area where blockchain can provide an elegant solution is with smart contracts. And smart contracts are basically automated agreements to do something. Now, it could be something like sell an asset, it could be transfer some data, or in this case, the right to use data. Now, combined with some of the new things that are coming, like data unions as a structure, this means that now using the blockchain, I can agree what can and can't be done with my data. I can essentially forget about this and have this flow through at scale into products which can then be bought by advertisers on data markets. So you have that kind of provenance which has previously been missing. And I think, the final element with blockchain are payment rails and tokens. Because if you think about, if there's going to be an economy with lots and lots of people getting paid, mostly low value transactions around their data's value on a daily basis, that crypto is a really cost-effective way to do that. And so, I mean, after launching, it was an amazing experiment that we did at Tap My Data, and it created, I think, a bit like with the cookies, it created new source of information about something and blew up lots of our preconceptions. So after launching Tap My Data's own token last year, I then took the opportunity to exit the company, and now I help a number of blockchain companies with their privacy and data strategy, and try and link this with that huge, centralized world around data commerce through the Data Privacy Protocol Alliance, and also teaching. So it's nice to see that, Tap My Data in some ways pioneered this ecosystem, and now it's growing really rapidly.
Yeah, sounds very interesting. I assume that's been a very complex in the beginning of these industries. I assume that's the challenging for the companies to work with the data protections. Then they also the leveraging of the blockchain, the technical performance. There should be the inclusions for the data development, the futures, but actually it's not easy to find the best solution to fit the one fits all. Though the approach is not realistic at the times. So my next question about the marketing space, and from the histories, then digital marketing it's a kind of the weapons of the companies to push their clients, push their business to make sales opportunities through the digital contents or digital distributions, advertisement network, which was a great ecosystem so far. However, it's becoming more strict to protect the consumer data under the GDPR, the CCPA. It's California. That's a very strict rule for the data privacy, the data protections. So from your perspective, how the digital marketing landscape has been changed since the data protection regulatory requirements is coming out, such as the GDPR, the CCPA in this moment?
Yeah, I mean that's a really good summary, and I think the answer is that it's changed slowly and then very quickly. And like you say, there's all sorts of new regulations which mean that large companies who want to engage in digital marketing, like you say, that's a key tool for them, have to take a pan-European, a pan-global approach to risk, and also have to look at some of the assumptions upon which that digital marketing ecosystem were based. And I think when personally, when I started thinking about privacy in marketing, lots of people, and to be honest, often with vested interests, insisted that, we're even saying, the privacy was dead. We've all heard that, and that people in general, and young people in particular, don't care about privacy and have no idea what happens to their data. And I felt, I mean, as a parent, I knew that this was wrong, and I wanted to prove that it's wrong. But actually, where we are at the moment with problems we see and some of the excesses around data is that it's a product of the online value exchange, the data deal being totally out of whack. So, the value of services that people receive from free stuff online is greatly exceeded by the money that a a few huge companies are making from them. And I think there's, before GDPR, there was very little public education about this in terms of what was going on with our data. And I think GDPR was huge because because for the first time, popular media was seeded with an effective campaign by governments to make people aware of their rights and businesses of their responsibilities around data. And I actually had, a few years ago, that moment on a London bus where I did overhear two old ladies talking about data privacy. And that's also fed through into what companies have experience in their contact centers in terms of customer service. The first thing people ask about now when they're unhappy about something is, how did you get my data? So that was a huge watershed moment. I think the danger was that when it all settled down with GDPR is that companies would sort of fall into the pattern of, for example, with cookie banners and disclosure, of going through the motions of, we have to tell you this because GDPR, and that nothing would change. And I think despite its complexity, GDPR is a huge, it's a blunt instrument, and an unfortunate product of that is that it's harder for voluntary groups and small businesses to use data legitimately, or charities is a good example, while big platforms can achieve baseline compliance easily. And in the case of, let's call them out, Google even start to act like regulators themselves. And in a marketing context, while cookies or third-party ones at least seem to finally be on the way out, there are a range of proposed cookie alternatives on the market, and which others we're starting to emerge as well. And these range from things like universal ID solutions, cookieless tracking, and contextual targeting, and Google's privacy sandbox, and FLoC's federated learning of cohorts, and other frameworks. So that the marketing industry is moving on, but the problem there is that most of the new centralized privacy proposals on the table from platforms are in conflict with the direction of competition and an antitrust concern. And this is, and the concerns flows through to brands, that this is going to lead to a lack of buyer power, or that there'll be regulators disrupting this process before the engine kind of melts down. And regulators, particularly in Europe, have made clear that they want standards and protocols for best practice around ID and now data to come from a consensus, a group of actors in the space, not one already incredibly powerful player. So I think for marketing, sadly, there is no one solution. There's no silver bullet to fix all the old practices of Web 2 use of data, which is around, Web 2 was around harvesting, siloing, monetizing, and monopolizing data's value and our attention. But this is an opportunity for the whole system to start thinking about how to reinvent itself. And that's why, new forums, communities, or safe spaces like the DPPA with which I'm involved, they start to bring in these new elements of decentralized Web3 blockchain tech are so important, because brands want to move beyond cookies to fair trade data. I hear every day brands saying to me, we want to, to have fair trade data, we want to have data clean rooms, we want to be wearing the white hats with data. And of course, that data is also de-risked and has a higher value. But this means that as digital marketers, we do need to get used to doing more with less volume of data, at least initially. So it's forced us to be more mindful of what we're trying to achieve, which I think is a good thing.
I see. Yeah, it's very complicated than compared to the audio at the beginning, to use the personal data, which was a little bit simple than just profiling the data through some of the data source, the integration, then synthesizing and for the usage of the data. But the problem is that all the data should be based on the consent-based transparency. That's very hard to convince the customers to be given the data for you. That's very challenging for the marketers. It's a very increased in cost to the data corrections right now. Yeah, that's a very interesting insight. So I want to explore the next question with you about the blockchain again. And I think the regulation is always against of the new technologies. It's not always, but most of the times. So the blockchain is also no doubt with it. Then among the blockchain communities, we are in argument, especially the using the personal data, which type of the data should be then stored and processing against of the data subject rights, such as we have to protect the right to be forgotten, any things. In case of the store, the blockchain, it's very sensitive data. It's not achievable in sometimes the some of the architectures. So how we should to take a balance the regulatory issues and new technologies, especially the decentralized for the data protection there.
Yeah, I mean that's a big question, and you're right. There's a debate has continued to rage, and I think because blockchain is public and decentralized, there has been an assumption that in all cases blockchain and privacy just don't mix, and I think that's starting to change. And in particular, what I predict is that we're all going to be hearing a lot about the use of some elements of blockchain, in particular zero knowledge proofs, over the next few years. Now, put simply, zero knowledge proofs are a type of cryptography that keeps details of a transaction hidden. So, for example, I could prove that I know the password to an account without entering the password and risking its exposure. Or another example, that I have enough money to cover my rent for the next year without telling some, random broker all the details of my personal finances. It embeds that kind of need to know aspect of data, which for us as privacy advocates is so important. And when you compare it, on Web 2 platforms like Facebook, all our data is captured and monetized centrally and often without our knowledge. So on the open blockchain, everything is public. So I think that zero knowledge proofs can start to allow provers and verifiers, if we move from hoarding data to people and organizations transacting it directly, it means that they can interact safely and transparently, at least in principle. And you mentioned regulation being against or wary of new technology. I think the first example, the first practical application of these zero knowledge proofs was with privacy coins. Now, the most common example is Monero. Now, these are a class of cryptocurrency, and they provide private and anonymous transactions by obscuring their origin and destination. Monero, it's interesting, in particular, it was launched as an open source project almost 10 years ago, and its founders wanted to address a critical flaws in currencies like Bitcoin, which are its traceability, and their belief that privacy and anonymity are the most important aspects of electronic cash. Now, obviously, this has led to a situation where these coins, they are used in, for example, a lot of like hacker ransoms. They are, are used for not all the right reasons in many cases. And although they're not illegal, they are banned in some jurisdictions and have a sort of a shady reputation. But I don't think that they should be dismissed from giving us insight to, privacy tech and the way that we can use these technologies in our own challenges. And it's interesting to see actually how some of the tech and tactics from this space have bled into the mainstream data marketing space. So, I mean, obviously Apple's iOS 15 update has made a big feature. It's focused on email security and privacy, and it's made a big feature of burner email addresses to their email privacy offering, all of which have been socialized in the crypto space. So I think there's a really interesting, the crypto space is creating a lot of these technologies, which I think if we approach with a privacy mindset are actually really useful, give us really useful insights and perhaps some technical solutions to the challenges as we move beyond sort of baseline compliance.
Yeah, absolutely. Then we're gonna dig in a best practice then just to desynchronize a new idea, to narrow this in a very privacy preserving the old processing. I think that's the kind of the new technical solution should be deployed to the many industries as well. Then we have to seek the use cases with the new technology, especially the decentralized governance model that could be the works in some of the ways to protect the privacy for the users. So that should be the deal. I think your initiative, it's a data privacy protocol alliance, is very related to these missions. Then those data should be more protected and should be used for the user-driven purpose. That could be deal from the marketing perspective as well. So I want to ask you about how do you envision of the DPPA work? Then how do you want to involve the other stakeholders to work together for the future?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting what you say about, privacy can be helped by crypto. I actually think that, it's a two-way street, that actually privacy can help crypto grow up in some ways. And ironically, some of the most widely used Web3 tech, like the MetaMask wallets, it picks up loads of personally identifiable data and it puts it out there. So that's the thing, the Web3 space is very much a work in progress. But as someone who's been active in both the Web3 space and advises conventional businesses as well on privacy, I've actually found that most of the crypto people, particularly techies, have the same set of beliefs around personal data that we do in privacy tech. And they're very receptive to approaches such as privacy by design and putting this into practice. And they don't have, large amounts of legacy tech and data and systems. So, at the end of the day, there are a lot of parallels with, the big tech, the data, and the blockchain space. And I mean, having been involved in, things like the Internet Advertising Bureau when I ran an agency, and also being a member for a number of years of the IAPP, I felt that there were times, to be honest, where I felt that I didn't really belong, and I wish that there was a space where you could bring together representatives of the existing data trade and these new players, these Web3 players, and actually have a bigger role for sort of socializing this tech, because I know that brands and big players in the data space want to look at more decentralized solutions. I mean, you've got, even Facebook now with their rebrand to Meta are explicitly saying that they want, for their own cryptocurrency, they don't believe that they have all the solutions, which is very humble of them, and that they want to create an alliance. So when I was approached by the Data Privacy Protocol Alliance at a very early stage, I thought that this was a really great way to bring together these some of the players in Web3 with brands and data buyers who wanted insights, and also who were looking for new markets, because many of the younger people that we talked about earlier, they're not on Facebook, they're not on, and they're very guarded about their data, and they're not accessible. And these are really attractive target customers with whom brands want to build up trust. And a lot of these Web3 tech is a way to do it. And I think in terms of what the Data Privacy Protocol Alliance expects this to lead to in the future, I think it's agreed standards and protocols, but also it's to start to have tech coming together. And if you're thinking of one killer app, it's a platform for data unions that I mentioned earlier. Data unions are a way for us to get together collectively to negotiate around our rights for data, what people, what happens with our data, and if and how we can earn from this. And I think it's something which is a really, something that I'm excited about, and that DPPA is excited about, and has a number of members who come, who are data unions. And there's one particular member, Pool, who are in the UK. They're building an incubator right now for hundreds of new unions. And this is something, I think the unions, decentralized marketplaces, and commonly agreed practical standards are all things that are necessary if we're going to build this Web3 ecosystem and migrate a lot of the existing advertisers to that. And that's absolutely the DPPA's focus.
Quite awesome. I've never been heard about the Web3 based of the advertisement so far. Then some of the big companies, IBM has been made a consortium where it involves some advertisement company, but they are more centric approach, is not the decentralized honestly. That's a big problem. I think those are very great commitment to create a new market for the futures based on the decentralized the consortium. What I'm very excited to see that how this to work in the futures advertisement industry instead of the using the centralized ecosystem. That's a big company has been organizing, and that's great things then. So yeah, finally, I want to ask you about the message for the listeners. You have a many experience. You have a very great things in the new technologies marketing. That's very insightful for all the listeners. So could you give us any message from that?
Yeah, I think my key message is to share and share and share. And by that, I mean that the levels of best practice in privacy will only be lifted if we have access to real data about the state of health of organizations when it comes to data privacy and people's rights. They're an unglamorous thing, but I'm a big fan of data privacy impact assessments. And when I'm working with new projects now, there's one project in particular, a data union called Swash. They did a data protection impact assessment before they'd done as a first step in their business planning. So before they built any code around how they would basically help people monetize their data. They did that, and they fed it back immediately to a university in Canada to be used by their PhD students and analyzed themselves. So that started a kind of a sort of a feedback loop where they would then work on the feedback from a university, and it would build a sort of a store of knowledge outside of that organization, which is now publicly accessible. I think it's those things, where that started with, elements of cookie data. Now we're starting to talk about things like data unions and DPIAs. The more that we can share, the more we will understand how we are going to replace something which is hugely complex. So I think sharing is my key takeaway. The second one is also to try and look beyond your own geographic area. One example is China's PIPL privacy law just came into effect for on the 1st of November, and it's been described by Linklater's law firm as one of the strictest privacy laws in the world. Now, it's my homework to read and understand more of that before we next speak.
Cool. Yeah, the Chinese law is also the great impact to our countries because it's very close to us. A lot of Japanese companies been outsourcing the business there. Then China has been a great opportunity, but it's very important for us to looking after the Chinese upgrades. Many guidelines will be published, and they have based on the security purpose. That is very challenging for the company, but we have to collaborate it to work on the matters. So yeah, that's very amazed. So thank you for having Gilbert this time. The great conversations.
Thank you.
We are very happy to collaborate it for the future, the digital marketing, the blockchain, future data protection industry. So thank you for having this time.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.